Welcome, everyone, for this hopefully very interesting event with Grace Mausser, the co-chair of New York City's Democratic Socialist of America. She's going to tell us about the remarkable campaign of Zohran Mamdani. But before we begin, I just want to remind everybody to please return your ballots. If you vote in California, New Jersey, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maine, Texas, and any of the other states like Ohio that have mayoral elections, and New York City, of course. Please return your ballots. Don't want to leave that one out. And if you need any help returning your ballot, you can find some information here. And if you can't find what you need there, then please go to our VFA website, and they have a help section where you can actually speak to someone live. So that's just going to votefromabroad.org. One other quick thing is, hold on, the Women's Caucus has a survey that they would like to share with you. If you could please, everybody, if you get a chance, I'm going to put this in the chat, and we will. That would help them out a lot. So now I'm going to turn it over to Sally DeCipio, the chair of our Global Women's Caucus. Sally?
Hey, thanks, Angela. Welcome everyone. I just want to mention that the survey that someone will post is for women. It's, we love you men, we welcome you, but the survey is for women. We want to find out where you are, what you find is important, what you'd like us to focus on over the next year. So please help us out, and it takes you 10 minutes to fill it out. Anyway, I just want to make mention because I think there's a lot of people who are not Democrats abroad members. Most of you know it's a global organization on almost every continent, and our mission is to create community among Democrats wherever you are and make sure we're getting people registered and then voting. Um, on behalf of DA, the Women's Caucus is super excited to welcome Grace Mausser. She's, as Angela said, she's co-chair of the New York City Democratic Socialists of America organization. I had the pleasure of hearing her speak to the Democratic Socialists in Austria about 6 weeks ago, and I realized that the story of the amazing candidate for mayor, Zohran Mamdani, is a story that traditional media is not telling. They like to breathlessly speak of the generational candidate who dropped out of thin air. Poof! The coded message here is that you not only have nothing to do with it, it relegates you to the passive observer. In fact, the story is so much more interesting than that, and it puts power firmly back in our hands. One last note before I pass it over to Grace. Please note this is not an event designed to debate policies or whether Mr. Mamdani will be able to enact his campaign promises. And we ask you to refrain from making distracting comments in the chat section, or we'll have to close it. I know everyone here is an adult, so let's play well together. I'm turning it back over to Angela, but before I do, I want to give a shout out to Hunter Christopher, who made sure I knew about Grace, but is also hands down the world's best damn promoter of all things democracy. So thank you, Hunter. Angela, Grace, who's taking over?
Grace, please go ahead and tell us something interesting.
Yes, thank you, Angela. Thank you, Sally. It's great to be here with all of you. Really excited to share some of the lessons we have learned in the continuing story of Zohran's mayoral campaign. So I am going to share some slides just to keep myself focused mainly. So these slides were initially designed for groups like other DSA chapters, other movement groups, which is why the title is this way. I've adapted it a little bit to be broader, but there might be some things that don't quite make sense for Democrats abroad, but I think a lot of the lessons in it are replicable for any organizer, anywhere in the world. And I should introduce myself as well. Like Sally and Angela said, my name is Grace Mausser. I'm one of the co-chairs of New York City DSA, which is the largest chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America in the country. We just surpassed 11,300 members in the city, and there are about 87,000 members in DSA across the country, which now numerically makes us the largest socialist organization in well over a century. So I will get going. So I like to start with how we got here, not with the beginning of Zohran's campaign, but with the beginning of our electoral strategy as NYC DSA. So, like most of DSA, we really grew and started to get serious after Bernie Sanders ran for president and popularized the concept of democratic socialism in modern terms. Excuse me. So in 2016, of course, Bernie ran for president. He did much better than many people expected. And I think the 1-2 punch of Bernie doing well and then two, Trump, in fact, winning, woke a lot of people who were left-leaning or progressives or even identified as socialists already, woke them up and gave us a drive to start organizing more seriously. In New York City, one of the ways that manifested is that we ran and lost two city council races. One was Hadarelia Team in Bay Bridge, which is in Southwest Brooklyn. I highlight this one because this is actually the race where Zohran first became active in DSA. So he was a volunteer, he canvassed with the campaign, he became a field coordinator, which is also a volunteer role, but kind of more of a strategizing role. And that's when he joined and got really involved in the organization. Following those two city council races, which again we lost, but we learned a lot, namely that DSA can and should be running a field operation and that we can do it from top to bottom. We decided to expand ourselves. In 2018, of course, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez won her congressional primary with DSA support in the Queens and Bronx. And Julia Salazar also won. Julia is obviously less famous than AOC, but unlike with AOC, where DSA played more of a supporting role, Julia was recruited from within our rank. She was a leader in the chapter, and we really ran her campaign from top to bottom. The staff, the highest staff were DSA members. There was a robust field operation from canvassers who showed up regularly to what we called field leads. They lead canvasses. What we call field coordinators. They usually coordinate the field leads, work with strategy, and work with the staff. And not all, but many of these were DSA members who were just constantly gaining skills and strategic insights about how to run and win a race. This allowed us to expand some of our ambitions. In 2019, we ran a district attorney race in Queens with Tiffany Caban. We were not the sole engine of this race. It was big, obviously, it's a whole county. But I would argue we were the primary engine, and we almost won this race. If anyone tells you canvassing, phone banking doesn't matter, Tiffany lost by 60 votes. That is theoretically a number that one canvasser could get over a few months. So I like to highlight that as everyone's effort really does matter. In 2020, we continued to expand and run. We ran 4 state legislative races. This is when Zohran first won and was seated in the assembly. This was a really key year for us because it allowed us to form our Socialists in Office committee. So one thing that DSA tries to do that I think distinguishes us from many other groups that are engaged in electoral politics is that after we run and when we win the races, we stay very engaged with the elected officials. We don't just say, good luck, come to our quarterly meetings. We have created the Socialist in Office Committee at both the state and the city level. And we meet weekly with elected officials and their staff in order to execute what we call the inside outside strategy. Some of you are probably familiar with that term, but the idea is that those of us on the outside of government can coordinate, take lessons, take strategic insight and information from people on the inside of government in order to make our tactics most effective. And that by working together, we can identify the right targets, the right types of legislation, the right tactics to be using. And we've seen that be very successful. And Zohran has been a major part of developing that strategy and this model as we continue, which is part of the reason we're excited that he's in office too, because we know that he has experience and interest in bringing outside organizations with him into governance and knows that that makes him stronger, not just a pain in his ass. So in 2021, we won 2 city council races, only 2 of 6. I highlight that we lost 4 because we probably lost almost as much as we've won. In those losses, though, every time we run a race, even when we lose, we're still training more people. More people are learning about strategy, not only in field and canvassing, but also in communications. They're making connections with other organizations. They're learning about compliance and legality. So we're really building a large bench of people who can understand critical aspects of how you run a campaign. We also increased taxes on the wealthy in New York, utilizing our new Socialist in Office Committee in Albany. In 2022, we won 2 more state legislative races. 2023, we had some re-elections for our 2 city council members. We also had a seminal piece of legislation passed, the Build Public Renewables Act, which again was part of our inside outside strategy, a bill that our Socialist in Office helped carry across the finish line. 2024, we won 1 more state legislative race, lost another one, but still growing our numbers in Albany. And then in 2025, of course, Alexa Aviles won her primary, which is very exciting. But of course, the big news is that Zohran won his primary. And so I highlight all of these different things to really underscore what Sally was saying. Zohran did not come out of nowhere, right? He comes out of organizations and of outside movements and has helped build up those movements. Additionally, all of these races, Zohran, of course, was not involved personally in all of them, but the organization was, which meant that we had a very strong foundation of people who were excited to canvass, but more importantly, excited to lead canvasses, identify new people, really bring in new organizers, new canvassers, and have the skills to do that and understand how that fits into a larger picture. So this next piece highlights some of how that happened. So these numbers are for the primary. We've knocked more doors now. I think well over 2 million. I think about 2.5 million doors at this point. But by the primary, we had 1.6 million doors, 2.3 million phone dials. This is the really, big number that people have highlighted, that we had 30,000 active volunteers. This means people who we can confirm actually came to a canvas. And then we had 50,000 people signed up. We're now at 90,000 people who have signed up to volunteer. So it's just growing and growing, but this is a huge number. I mean, this is a small town of people who have canvassed for Zohran. But the number I'm most proud of is that we have nearly 500 field leads. So these are people who are leading canvases. It's actually quite a bit of responsibility. I was leading a canvas last night, actually. You need to get the materials. You need to know the script well enough to teach it to other people. You need to be able to handle on the ground problems and answer people's questions. You're monitoring chats to see if any issues are coming up. You're there for not only the training at the front, but the debrief at the end of the night, and are also responsible for setting a positive culture so that people want to come back. We're trying to build something that people want to keep coming back to. So this is the number. I mean, these are people who are really actually trained organizers, right? They're not just coming to a canvas, but we know they have the skills to work with and move large numbers of people. So some of the big, I won't stay on the field strategy too much, but I think it's just interesting to share. But I think starting early was really key. You know, people might have thought Zoran came out of nowhere. I showed you he's actually been around for a long time. But even within the scope of this campaign, we started with a field launch in December of 2024, and 500 people showed up for someone who was polling at less than 1%. This was because there was so much enthusiasm within DSA and within other partner organizations for Zoran because he had been building those connections, and the organizations also understood what his message would mean for how we wanted to transform the city. Leadership replication is really important in any type of organizing. This is why I highlighted the field lead numbers. Another important job of a field lead is to identify other field leads, right? So if someone's coming to a canvas regularly or to a phone bank regularly, they seem excited. Ask them if they want to become a lead. And that is really, really key to not only replacing yourself so people can dip in and out as their capacity allows, but to actually expanding, right? You need more leaders if you want to get bigger. Okay, I will leave that there and move forward. So so I do talk about DSA here. I won't focus on that too much, but some key things from communications that I wanted to highlight. Um, I'm I really want to highlight that messaging is central here. Sally referenced at the beginning that a lot of the takeaways from media might be slightly off, that he came out of nowhere. You'll read things that say like, oh, he really got the TikTok algorithm down. But that is downstream of what Zohran was actually saying. And he was talking with extreme discipline about affordability. He had these three big planks: freeze the rent, fast and free buses, universal childcare. Of course, there are other things involved in his messaging, but he hit on these and tied them back to affordability over and over and over and over again. And if someone tried to pull him off that message with a something from the New York Post, an accusation of something he said a while ago, he was extremely practiced and very disciplined at bringing it back to this message. This is what I think allowed his investment in social media and video to really pay off. So he did invest in these. I think that was really important. But also the videos that are slickly produced and fun to watch, but don't say anything that resonates with people, really won't be particularly effective. If it's not an inspiring message, all you have is a well-produced video, basically. So I really want to center what he was saying as why these videos were so primed to take off. I think there were other parts of his video and visual language too that played into this, like from New York, sewer socialism, affordability piece. The videos really focus on New York visuals, really showed him as someone who was a regular New Yorker, who was on your street, who was in front of a rent stabilized apartment, in those apartments, in a bodega, in a diner. And this, I think, really made the campaign feel a lot more accessible. So I want to talk to you a bit about coalition strategy because I think this is something in particular that might be relevant to Democrats abroad. But the coalition strategy used by the unions, or I'm sorry, reading the slides, used by the campaign was really, I think, innovative in a lot of ways. So, one piece of this was building on ties in the Muslim community. There was a lot of really extensive mosque outreach. Zohran went into this campaign with a thesis that Muslim voters were really untapped. No one had spoken to Muslims as a voting electorate, and he believed that he could do that, and he could also tie some of those voters, some of whom are more conservative in their social views, with a leftist and more progressive bloc. And he was right. And some of that was his identity and existing ties, but a lot of it was very intentional outreach in mosques and in Muslim communities. There was also a heavy use of Reach, which I would love to hear when in a bit if that's something you guys have experience with. Reach is a really great app that is tied to Voter Action Network or VAN, which is the what most people use to canvass. Reach lets you do relational organizing in a way that really captures the data. It goes through your phone contacts if you'd like it to, and it matches people to the voter profile that is publicly available. It makes it really easy for you to contact friends, family, colleagues who live in the city in this case, but sometimes if you use it for a district or a state, it would match to that area and really is a great tool to make sure you're tapping your existing network in a methodical but also approachable way. I'll also highlight that there was a really big coalition for the Zohran campaign. I think DSA and other groups, groups like Drum or Cav, which I don't know if you guys would be familiar with, but these groups that were really early in Zohran's coalition were able to show leadership, and I think it's helping us solidify a broader left labor coalition, not only to move forward Zohran's agenda if and when he's elected, but also in our fight and defense work against Trump. And we're seeing a lot of that in action right now. I think the campaign's really inclusive approach to that has put all of the movement in a better position to be working together as we face innumerable threats from the Trump administration. So I'll highlight a couple of challenges. I'll try to get through some of these. Some of them are specific to DSA. Of course, we building name recognition for Zohran was a challenge, but I think the combination of having a strong foundation with a group like DSA that knew Zohran, that was ready to be activated and to do the work was really key. Having strong comms with a strong message was an immediate way for people to connect with the campaign. But then having this canvassing apparatus, I put it as doors, doors, doors here, allowed people to take their excitement when they saw a video on Instagram or on TikTok and actually do something with it. So that having the pipeline from excitement to action is so key. And I think most campaigns don't have a good sense of how important that is and don't invest enough into field and action for their volunteers. We also had to absorb a lot of new people within the slide. I'm focusing more on DSA's strategy for doing that, but I think a lot of the lessons we learned are applicable to a number of orgs. We have really invested a lot of time and infrastructure into building up what we call a membership committee, but they do things not only that are focused on campaigns, but also have developed a fairly robust social life within the organization in an organized way, like game nights, soccer leagues, softball games, things like that. We also are really working on scaling up and supporting our non-electoral projects that can engage new members. So, like I hinted at the beginning, we are trying to build an organization that's not only electoral, but that can move forward our policy visions and work with the electeds to actually deliver on what they're promising. So we're really focusing on things like immigrant rights, trans rights, and a tax the rich campaign, which we would use, which we would hope would fund a lot of Zohran's priorities. And then I've already talked a little bit about how Zohran's campaign was connected to DSA, but broadly, he has hired a lot of people, and he himself is really committed to staying connected to the broader ecosystem. I think this is aligned with his experience going from a DSA member to a DSA elected in 2020. And you see it in who he's hiring and how he's approaching not only campaigning but governing. A lot of progressive New York mayors, maybe not a lot. I'm mostly thinking of Bill de Blasio, but Bill de Blasio brought in progressive ideas and achieved a lot, certainly. I don't mean to undermine some of his achievements, but he didn't have the robust outside infrastructure, not only DSA, but also many other groups that Zohran has brought in to back him up and help create the conditions and the pressure that he needed to implement some of his more ambitious ideas. And I think Zohran coming in with that will make a big difference, or I'm hoping it does. So I will just highlight a couple things and then close. I'm sure I've talked too long here. But I think we really want to, one thing that we learned with top of the ballot tickets, top of the ballot races, is foregrounding relatable material issues, staying super on message about that was really key. It resonated with people and it kept Zohran from being dragged into other types of debates about the merits of his candidacy. Smaller wins and smaller losses should be creating capacity. So when we take on a race, we always think about what we gain if we win, but also what there is to gain if we lose. And I think doing these races year after year after year, even when it's tiring, actually allowed us to have the capacity to seize on this big political moment. And build build the infrastructure and the size of the size of volunteer army that we needed to make it happen. Investing in comms is key. I think you'll see that a lot in more popular media narratives, but the organizing infrastructure to back up those comms is even more critical. If people get excited about something and then have nowhere to put that excitement, that's wasted energy. And so organizers need to have an infrastructure first mentality. And that's something I think a lot of the narratives are missing. Like how much time and money and investment you need to build this type of infrastructure. You see a video, but what happens after a video is watched and a sign up happens is way more important than the video itself. And then I think approaching coalition with openness and being able, like putting your organization in a position to be a coalition leader is really key. We've been lucky to get to be part of an even bigger tent than we usually are as DSA as part of this campaign. And I think it's been really transformational, not only for the organization, but hopefully for the city and for the movement life of the city as a whole to actually have all these groups in connection with one another, not only as we react offensively against the Trump administration, but also as we react offensively. to put Zohran's agenda into action. Okay, I will leave it there. I think I spoke too long. So Sally, sorry about that. And Angela, but
No,
thank you.
no, you didn't speak too long. No worries. You were great. This was all really valuable and important information. I think it's something that I think it's something that Democrats abroad and the Democratic Party in general could use. I was really impressed by your timeline. Um, I have to say, I watched the mayoral uh, debate. I don't even know if that's the right word for what that was. It was it was scary, and I think our politics have to change. Um, a lot before we can actually have a debate because that was I don't know what did you think about that debate with the other two candidates?
I mean, it was I watched both of the debates from the last I guess 2 weeks, 3 weeks that they happened. What did I think about them? I mean, I think Savron won, but I'm also pretty biased. Um, I feel like he was in a position where he was just trying to maintain his leadership and also was effectively able to attack Cuomo a couple times on the question of experience, which I think in some ways is, an actual concern that people have. Zoran is young, he's bringing new ideas into this office, but a critique of a bad experience coming from Cuomo is not a great is not a great critique because, as Zoran said, his experience is not actually something we want to replicate anymore. But I thought it was interesting and a great example of Saran's message discipline, right? When Cuomo tried to pull him into attacks about anti-Semitism or attacks on his experience or attacks about his stance on how, if we should decriminalize sex work, he engaged with that very briefly and then immediately pivoted back to the affordability message, because I think that's really what people care about. They care about what impacts their life. And for most people, that, Zoran's exact stance on decriminalizing sex work isn't going to impact their day-to-day life, but having universal childcare, having a rent freeze will.
Yeah, I agree. He did a really great job staying on message. We have so many questions in the Q&A. I'm just going to jump to some of those really quickly because I don't want anybody's questions not to be answered. Um, Cheyenne, she says 30,000 volunteers are incredible. What are the most impactful strategies to scale that many volunteers while maintaining impact?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece that is difficult for more traditional campaigns to understand is that in order to scale this much, you have to let go of some control. So I mentioned that we had 500 field leads. I'm sure they're all wonderful, but I'm also sure that they've all made mistakes at some point, right? You mess something up, you don't tell someone to the quite right line about a piece of policy, and then those 500 field leads are training thousands and thousands of volunteers, and I'm sure many of them have messed up at some point, right? But you just have to let go of some of the desire to control the message so tightly if you want to be able to scale up that quickly. But the other thing that I'll highlight is investing time and resources into that middle layer of volunteer leadership is really, really important. The way we got to 500 field leads is by having dozens of field lead trainings and actively recruiting people, especially at the beginning, to be field leads. So you have to put a lot of time and energy into that. The Zohran campaign did. By far, the largest portion of their staff are field organizers. Um, I think they have about 3 dozen staffers at this point. I think about half of them are field related. So they really invest in making sure that volunteers are empowered, that they have the knowledge that they need. A lot of time was spent on that, developing resources, answering questions, and they put a lot of energy into that. And I think that middle layer is how you having a large middle layer means that you can have a massive canvassing layer. So that's the key portion, identifying and training leaders who are able to step up from being a regular canvasser and into leading canvases.
Okay, we have a question from Bruce. Some bemoan that Democratic canvas leaders favored reaching target numbers instead of quality interaction in the 2024 presidential campaign. What can DSA teach us about ensuring the quality of interactions with voters as we move through 2025 to prepare for 2026?
Yeah. I mean, DSA has built our entire electoral theory on canvassing, that you're going to have more persuasive, better conversations if you can get someone face to face. And even if all those conversations aren't perfect, aren't exactly on message, having that actual connection with people is makes a real difference. I mean, I've knocked doors and people have had questions I can't answer. But when you're face to face, they're not usually mad at you. They know you're a volunteer. They appreciate the time that you're putting into it. If you can communicate enthusiasm, that's often contagious. And I don't think most Democrats believe that canvassing is really valuable. They might say they do, but whenever I've volunteered or worked for a non-DSA campaign, I've often found that it's sort of a side thought. It's like, oh, they got to have something to do. And it's not treated as a central point that informs strategy. But with this campaign, field is not only seen as critical as part of persuasion, as a augmentation and a personalization of the broader, media messages that the campaign is sending out, but it also is treated as a valuable feedback loop. If you're hearing something a lot on the doors, you actually know if something is effective. One example of that for the Zohran campaign was how he developed his platform plank for the Department of Community Safety, which is his keystone piece about policing community safety more broadly. He initially wasn't focusing very much on policing. As you can imagine, that can be a tricky subject for socialists, but he knew it was one he would have to obviously engage with heavily as mayor. But early on, this was something a lot of New Yorkers were concerned about. And it wasn't from, an attacking socialists as an idea point of view, but it was just like, it does feel like there are more unwell people on the streets. I'm seeing a lot. How are we dealing with this? And so the campaign accelerated the development of the community safety department. And now that's something that volunteers have and can talk about when someone is saying, like, oh, I'm concerned about safety in my neighborhood. We have a response about how Zohran will change that and will address that in a way that's new and somewhat novel, because what we've been doing isn't working.
So when your canvassers get feedback from people, do they like report in or something like that? What's happening?
Yeah, so there's two ways that feedback is usually collected. One is just like a Google form that we encourage all canvassers to use after their canvas. That's part of what a lead asks you to do. And then either staff or volunteers at the campaign office go through that feedback. And I know they do that because I was assigned for a few days to be the one to go through it and pick out trends and share that with the field director. The other way that we capture feedback is through the lead themselves. So for yesterday when I was leading a canvas, some people filled out the form, some people probably didn't, but I always ask, what were there any interactions that really stand out for you positively or negatively? Is there anything you think is important for me to share with the campaign? And this is part of the debrief. We have canvassers come back after their canvas, they need to return their materials, and you always want to ask them and try to capture at least some of their impressions from that shift. And then if sometimes there's not much there, though it's like, oh, it was great. Oh, this didn't work well. How do I get into this building? Not, some stuff like that you don't have to quite share further up the food chain, but sometimes they may have met someone who's a block captain. They have been asked about an issue that we don't know the answer to. We should see if there's an answer on this policy issue. I've heard three canvassers say they want to hear Zohran's thoughts about, XYZ. And that leads are asked to share up with coordinators or with the field directors.
Yeah, thank you. We have a question from Aaron. Uh, DIMS Abroad is also a large distributed organization, but since we're global, it's also much more digital. What have you learned that could apply to digital / online organizing?
Yeah, that is why I spoke a little bit about the Reach app. I'm not sure if y'all have worked with a campaign that uses that app, but I do think that is really great asynchronous and digital organizing that could be useful for your group. Phone banking too. I'm sure you do a lot of phone banking, but it really does work. I know it's not everyone's favorite. Some people love it. But we often, on the ground, there are some buildings, some people you just can't get in contact with. They're not home. There's a doorman, whatever. There are some buildings that we're not going to be able to talk to that person face to face. But on the phone, that's really critical. And this was I worked for a state senate candidate in 2020, which everything was digital in 2020. And we ran our whole campaign virtually and on phone banking. So it really can and does work. But I think that relational organizing using Reach, and also using things for many, Facebook has fallen away. But we have found that community Facebook groups, affinity Facebook groups are really good ways to build support and identify people because people are often using their full name on Facebook too. So if there are any groups that you're organically a part of, I think just kind of sharing about voting, making asks of people if they plan to vote for Zohran, and then putting that into an app like Reach is really truly helpful for the campaign.
Yeah, we've looked at Reach, but it kind of violates the GDPR rules for data here, so we can't use it. But we
Oh,
do, yeah, we do phone banking, and we also do tabling where a lot of Americans gather. We'll set up a booth for people to come and talk to us because it's a
got it.
little bit different here because we're intermixed with other other nationalities. So.
Yes, I've gotten to meet quite a bit with some European parties too, with Die Linke in particular. And the data privacy laws in Germany are so much stronger.
Yes.
To the extent they're like, how do you do this? I'm like, well, we know everything about a person and you know nothing, so I'm actually not sure.
Yeah, it's a little bit more difficult in this way for us,
It's
but
harder for canvassing, probably better for society though. So.
yeah, I agree. I agree. We have a question from Naomi. How are the campaigners dealing with the conflation of socialism, socialist with communist?
You know, I don't engage with that too much. Usually the people asking that aren't actually interested, right, in the political differences between socialism and communism. So when asked that, I actually was doing an interview on Monday where they asked that. I tried just to define democratic socialism as, building a democratic pathway for people to have more control in all aspects of their lives, from political to economic. So trying to stay on message with that. I know there's a variety of views on what communism is and communism isn't, but DSA is what we call a big tent organization on the left. So there are members in DSA who identify as communists. So I don't really want to throw them under the bus. But I also know that when people are asking that, they're not typically interested in a like political science debate. So I tried just to clarify what democratic socialism means to us and really emphasizing the democratic pathway piece, right? No one's interested in a coup or anything like that. We want to build majority support for these ideas, and that is how we believe we'll get there.
Yeah, that's people that want to have that discussion. They just want to, I don't know, stir stuff up. Um, and there's nothing wrong with socialism. We use it all the time. All our most favorite policies are socialist, for sure.
Yes. Definitely
They are.
highlighting that, some things we already have are socialist in nature, and we want to expand on those things.
Yeah. We have a question from Nico. Nico, is there a plan for Mandani to respond to the misinformation about him? Would he ever consider going on Fox? Not sure he'd be invited.
I think he actually has been on Fox in the last couple of weeks. I would want to fact check that. But Zoran, I think, is interested in moving in the footsteps of Bernie, right? And actually engaging with people where they're at. And for many people who feel disaffected with politics, they've gone rightward. I think some segment of those people can be brought into a different way of thinking. So Saran has gone on Fox. I think, yeah, some of the attacks against him, he's ignored and pivoted. Some he has engaged with head on. Actually, last week, I think over the weekend, he released a video talking about running as a Muslim, addressing the Islamophobia that has always been present in this campaign, but that Cuomo and Sliwa have really leaned into in the last 2 weeks. And I think it's always a balancing act on when to ignore something and pivot and when to address it head on. But he and his team have very good instincts on that, and I would encourage everyone to watch his video talking about Islamophobia. It made me cry, and so he's doing some of that.
Right. We have another question. What is the percentage of Mamdani's NYC budget that will go to pay for the three planks, free buses, free childcare, and freezing rent control?
I don't know the specifics of what his budget plan are. Some of the funding will need to come from the state, which we're aware of, too, and that's part of why having outside organizations like DSA apply pressure to the state in a coordinated way, is so important. But I don't know exactly what the what the budget numbers will look like, so I can't give a great answer to that right now.
Yeah. And as far as free buses, I just have to say, just have to add this, public transportation is public and it should be free. Like, that's not that complicated. It's public.
Yes,
Um,
you said it.
yeah. Um, do you collect any data on the effectiveness of canvassing and phone banking or on the relative effectiveness of the various techniques for canvassing / phone banking?
Yes. So we do try to match. So when we collect data, We refer to them as IDs, right? So when you're collecting data on people and then you mark how much they're supporting, we do usually try to go back and see how many of our IDs actually voted, right? Of course, you can't tell how they voted. But in years when we've lost more than we've won, our our IDs, we have fewer votes than IDs, which means we talked to people who were enthusiastic, who said they were going to vote for us, but then didn't actually go out and vote. We found that to be a problem in years, well, basically in the years between 2020 and now. I think a lot of leftists and progressives and left-leaning liberals were somewhat demobilized under the Biden presidency. We also didn't have in New York State many top of the ticket races. So there weren't very exciting gubernatorial races in our districts. There weren't any in some cases. Congressional races or things higher up. A race I worked on in 2024, in fact, was a state assembly race. The assembly race was literally the only thing on the ballot. It's hard to get people excited about a state assembly race, even if you knock their door 3 times and they're a socialist, it's just easy to forget. So we found obviously that turnout is higher in years where there's bigger races happening and in years where there are bigger fights happening, right? When Trump is on the ballot, people come out to vote even during the primaries. So we do track that. These are some broad trends that we found. Um, Areas where we canvass a lot vote more than areas where we don't. Canvassing we found is more effective than phone banking on the whole, but phone banking, like I said, captures people that we often can't get to canvassing. So it is still very valuable. It's just not as effective. But I think given that it's a lower physical lift and a lower infrastructural lift in many ways, it's very much worth it. So we try to analyze this data as much as we can because we want to canvass and target voters as effectively as possible, and we want to be strategic about what races we choose. Part of the reason DSA wanted to try doing a mayoral race back in October of last year was because we had seen that top of the ticket races, were so much more mobilizing for down ballot races as well. So we saw this as an opportunity to test that out and to frankly gather data about voter trends from across the whole city. Whereas previously we've only had data about voter trends in the districts where we have run races, which of course is only subsections of the city.
Yeah, we've found that too, that when we need a big race to bring people out, even though people can vote, they don't always do it when it's just one thing or one office.
Mhm.
Um, how does DSA succeed in coalition building, managing the tensions between cooperation and competition?
Yes, that is a very live question. So I think a few years ago, a lot of other groups were skeptical of DSA. And DSA, to be fair, can also be skeptical of other groups. So there's some suspicion running both ways. I think in terms of competition, there's not as many groups that are trying to build quite what we're building, right? We have a membership funded model, so we're not competing with funders, with community groups, where we try to operate in that way more like a union, but we're also not competing with unions, right? You have to be in a certain workplace to be in a union, and DSA is open. We're also a citywide and multiracial organization. Right, we are disproportionately white, which is something that we're aware of and trying to work on. But many of our partner groups focus specifically on certain racial or ethnic groups. So in that way, we encourage members that want to dual card with other organizations if it makes sense. And frankly, now that we're on the precipice, hopefully, of having a mayor so fully associated with DSA, there's also a lot more interest in partnering with DSA, and we're excited about that, and excited about the possibilities that that opens up for us building a left labor coalition. And I think everyone is shocked in some ways, still recovering from Zohran winning. But as we do that, like, we all see that there are a lot of opportunities to work together. I think the bigger and more serious DSA is, right, the more seriously we're treated too. So it's been a rapid adjustment in some cases with big union directors, politicians who would never have been interested in us 8 months ago, calling us and asking to meet. But it's exciting too.
And this might be a hard question, but do you have any tips for building a field campaign from scratch?
From scratch. I'm I'm sure I do. Let me think where to start. It's just so big that I'm trying to think of where to go. I mean, I think, okay, so the first things you need are a canvassing strategy, right? Like, where do you want to canvass, and how are you identifying who you're talking to? Are you in what types of tactics? Is it tabling, like you were mentioning, Angela? Are we trying to go door to door and target specific people? Are we not able to do that because of privacy law? So do we need to go building by building? Um, Answering that will help you develop what your script should look like. Um, there's many examples of scripts. I'm happy to share some too if that's of interest. But developing a script, a rap sheet, a flow, whatever you want to call it, is really important. Figuring out too how you're collecting data. Are you using something like Voter Action Network? If you're not able to access that, how else is that information coming back and being utilized? Because you want, I mean, data collection is important for strategy, but it's also important that if you're asking people to take time out of their day to go do this thing, that it matters, right? That you're getting something back for it and they feel like what they're collecting is important. From there, I mean, if we're really starting from zero, we want to identify some of those field leads. Uh, Ideally, these people have helped develop answers to all these questions that I've talked about. I think it's good probably to start with, I mean, depending on how frequently you want to be canvassing, when we start out an assembly race, which is a much smaller region, we usually start with about 3 canvases a week, one on a weekday, then one each on Saturday and Sunday. So you probably need at least about 5 to 6 leads to start with that. So ideally, you're identifying those 5 to 6 people, developing answers to those questions I mentioned, developing a script, and then those 5 to 6 people. I mean, you can launch your campaign. You might not have a big list or a big reach yet, but those 5 to 6 people should also be recruiting, you know, 3 to 10 friends each to come to their campus, to make it actually full of people. I think, yeah, sorry, that's off the top of my head, but I think that's where I'd start.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions. Can you stay just a little bit longer?
I think I can. Let me just double check that. Yes, I can.
All right. It's a question from Kristen. Could you talk a little bit more about community building and how to do this and how to translate that to an impact at the ballot box?
Yeah, I think the part of community building that can be hard or at least for me, that can be a difficult hurdle, is getting people in the practice of politicizing the spaces that they're already in. That doesn't mean you need to be an annoying friend or customer or anything like that all the time, right? You don't have to bug people constantly. But if politics are important to you, if these races are important to you, we need to get comfortable asking people who we don't interact with in a political way what their politics are. This can mean people that you interact with at the store. I mean, I had often it was happening to me organically because I have a lot of Zohran things that I wear. So people at the bodega I go to or at the wine store on the corner would ask me about the race and getting used to talking with talking with a stranger at a door is one thing, but talking with a semi-stranger that you interact with regularly can feel a little awkward. And getting used to that takes some time and some intentionality. I think the same is true for reaching out to friends who you maybe don't talk about politics with too often. But really just I've found myself that people aren't usually mad that I have asked them about an important race, right? So they're interested, they may want to know more, but I think that community, I mean, we all already have a lot of communities that we're part of, right? In person, online, some are more intentional, some are more casual, like maybe at a store or at your salon. And just getting used to in those areas, finding ways to bring your politics into it and to ask people earnestly and conversationally about what they think and what their plans are is difficult, but is a really valuable skill to develop.
All right, and one last question. What have you learned that works and that does not work in terms of messaging that you may have been surprised by?
Hmm. So, I mean, one thing I always teach canvassers to ask people what's important to them in an election. And some people have answers ready, but most people don't. This was, I think, surprising to me when I first started canvassing. But most people, if you're knocking on their door at 7:30, are, putting their kids to bed, making dinner. They're not like, what is the most important political topic to me right now? That's not top of mind for them. Um, so I was a little surprised by that in my first, few years canvassing. I found generally that you can take context clues right from the buildings you're in. Do you hear a kid in the background? Talk about childcare. Are you in a building that seems like it's probably rent stabilized? Talk about rent. And so try to give those those tips to canvassers. Generally, you want to just connect it as much to their like life as possible. So if they give you the answer that's of what's most important to them, that's important. That's like the best way to do it. But if they don't, kind of suggesting things based on context clues tends to work pretty well. So always just trying to ground it in what is actually impacting people, what is impacting this individual person too, and trying to personalize it as much as you can. I think being pretty vulnerable also works well. That can be hard because you're knocking doors sometimes by yourself. You don't always want to be vulnerable to strangers, but really trying to share why you are there, why this is important to you in an earnest way opens up other people too. Um, I'm not sure if that's a good answer on what is surprising, but it's what comes to mind for the question.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Grace, for taking time out of your day to talk with us. You've provided me, and I hope everyone else, with a lot of valuable information. Um, I am 100% sure Zoran will win this election. If that debate was any any measurement, he will definitely win. And I hope that one day you'll come back and visit us.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much for having me. If there are any follow-up things I can help with, Sally and Hunter both have my information. So
Okay, great. And I just want to remind everybody that, or just let everybody know that we'll be having, if you're interested in volunteering, we'll be having a couple of Connect the Dots sessions, which is going to all our global groups. We'll be out there to have to tell you what they do and ask for your help with certain positions. It's on November 16th. We have two sessions, one for AP in the Americas and one for, I guess, EMEA in the Americas. And we hope you'll join us there. Sally, any final words?
Yeah, I just want to thank you, Grace. Like, I know, I mean, the fact that you're coming to talk to us days before this really important election is super meaningful and really, really, I know a lot of us are going to be poring over your insights and see how can we adapt them to what our unique situation is over here, but really helpful. And yes, we will be following up with you for sure
yes.
after this, when we're on the other side.
And thank you for the work you're doing. I'm gonna run, but nice to talk with all of you.
Thank
Thanks
you,
again.
Grace.
Thanks for
Bye.
joining us.
You.
All right. All right, everybody. Thanks for coming. And like I said in the beginning, please return your absentee ballots. If you have not done so, time is the meter's running. So if you have to send it back by postal mail, consider using a courier service like DHL or UPS, or whatever that other one is, that I can't remember the name of. Um, and everybody have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you the next time.
And thank you,
Thanks.
Angela.
Thank you so much, Angela.